Hi, Edmonton Microsoft data professionals. I am Randolph West, and if you've never heard of me, that's okay. I am the content lead for SQL Server on Linux, SQL Server tools, and SQL Server migrations in the Microsoft Docs team, which is about 400 people in total. And my team is 10, 9 or 10 people, depending on which month it is. And we run the database docs side of things. I'm also a co-author. I'm not the author, but I'm a co-author of SQL Server Administration Inside Out for 2017, 2019, and 2022. Please buy my book so that I can buy a coffee this month, because that's all the money I get for books. I am a former PASS regional mentor for Canada. That was for about 3 months before PASS shut down. I'm also a former 5-time DataPlatform MVP, and the MVP thing was taken away from me when I joined Microsoft. So if I had not joined Microsoft, I might have continued being an MVP. Who knows? It's a mystery how they are assigned and given out. I'm also a charter member, which means I founded and then left the Microsoft Azure Data Community Advisory Council. Again, I left because I joined Microsoft, and the Azure Data Community was created out of the ashes of PASS, because COVID did a number on a lot of organizations, and PASS happened to be one of them. On the right, there are 2 ways to get hold of me. BornSQL.ca, that's my consulting company that I run in the background. I've got a blog on there, and I used to blog every week, and I blogged every week for, I think, 5 years. I don't do that anymore, but I do blog once in a while. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I usually post stuff that's happening in the Microsoft Docs world. So if you want to get hold of me there, that's probably the best place. I will probably not be your friend on LinkedIn, but you can follow me and see what I have to say. Today, we're going to talk about 2 products, SQL Server 2025 in preview. I've put it in preview because we're not out yet. So anything I tell you today, I have to be very careful about my wording. So if you ask me a question and I say I cannot answer that, it's because of the lawyers at Microsoft. Microsoft, I refer to as a law firm that releases software from time to time. So if you want to be scared of anyone, it's the lawyers. So I'm going to say things that may or may not be coming out in the final product. And I just want to preempt by saying it's in preview. Then SQL Server Management Studio, version 21 was released earlier this year. And I can say, because it was announced last week, that SSMS 22 is on its way. Preview 1 was released last week. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Welcome, Bobby. All right. So SQL Server 2025 is a big release for Microsoft generally. If you want to have a look at the history of, I'm actually going to blank that out. If you want to have a look at the history of SQL Server releases in general, you'll look back on 2005 being a really big release, because that's where everything changed over from into the .NET era, let's call it. So you got SSMS for the first time. You got a bunch of new products that were and features that were included. And then 2008 brought us new data types. Then the next big release was probably 2014 with the new cardinality estimator, and 16, 17 with Linux and all those new features of temporal tables and so forth. People might argue, and I would say that's safe to say, that 2019 and 2022 were not that big in terms of feature releases, but 2025 definitely is. And there's a few changes as well that'll be interesting to talk about as we go through this. There are analytics improvements. I don't know how many people in the room or watching the recording are big on analytics, but if you work with Polybase, there's some big changes there. There are obviously artificial intelligence features, because AI is the big thing that is happening right now. I will tell you that I have to use Copilot at work, just like everybody else at Microsoft, and it has also been included in SSMS 21. If you find use in Copilot, and there are uses for artificial intelligence, which I prefer to call machine learning, you will find benefits in some of the features that have been added to the database product. There are some features that I'll just take you through quickly there. There's a new feature called Change Event Streaming, which I encourage you to look at as well. We're not going to cover too much about that, but it is in there and it's very cool. There are database engine improvements. This is the things that I care about because I used to be a DBA and I care about performance. So database engine improvements, definitely something to look into. If you run SQL Server on Linux, the new releases are going to support things like Red Hat 10, Ubuntu 24.04, that kind of stuff. Now, the big thing about 2025 is that this is not Microsoft's wording, this is Randolph's wording. It's secure by default. So you're going to see things like encryption at every level. You're going to see encryption strict for your main database connections. You're going to see encryption strict for your SQL CMD, your BCP, your linked servers, all of that kind of stuff. Now, the state of that during the release cycles is not completely finalized, so you may see stuff moving into cumulative updates if it's not out with GA. I cannot comment on that because I'm scared of lawyers, but you can expect to see in the next few months that everything inside SQL Server will be secure by default, and that's a good thing. It means headaches for you. It means headaches for you that have got environments that are older than 10 years that you've just been maintaining over the months and years. You're going to have problems with linked servers. I'm just letting you know in advance to think about that when you start testing your 2025 implementation. And then the big news is that Power BI Report Server is replacing SQL Server reporting services. SSRS is going away. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody who uses Power BI and has used SSRS in the past, but SSRS is going away. That is official. So, shall we talk about the AI stuff quickly? I've mentioned Copilot and SQL Server Management Studio. There's an article that Aaron Stellato, who's the program manager for SSMS, one of the program managers, you can read about how Copilot helps you. It is database context sensitive, and database context aware. So if you connect to a particular instance in a query window, and then you open up Copilot on the right, it will know where you are, and you can ask it questions about your database. It can generate scripts. Please, as with anything, if you're asking an intern to generate a script for you, or if you're asking Copilot to generate a script for you, please don't run them in production without testing them first. I'm asking you nicely. Just test everything like you've been taught how to do. And if you haven't grown up with testing your scripts first, well, you just need to drop one database in production to learn that testing is a valuable experience. And I am speaking from my own experience there. So Copilot is there. It is useful for if you want to know the table structures and data types and stuff in your environment. If you're plugging into a new testing environment or a new test database that you've never seen before, it can be useful for that kind of stuff. I personally have not used it because I'm using a Mac and SSMS only runs on Windows. So I haven't used it for that reason, not for any other reason. You don't have to read in anything about my feelings on Copilot. Moving on to the cool stuff in Database Engine itself in 2025, we've got the vector data type, we've got vector indexes and vector functions. If you know what those are, you will be very excited. If you don't know what those are, this will mean nothing to you. So I just want to make it very clear here that these are very cool things if that's your field. Just like JSON support. I'm excited about JSON support inside the database engine, native JSON support, but I don't know what a vector is. I asked Copilot the other day to explain what a vector was, and it told me, and it seemed very excited for machine learning people, but I don't understand what it means. So that's okay if you don't know what it means, because I don't. The other thing that's cool with the artificial intelligence features is the fact that you can manage external models. So you can use the database engine to call out to a model and bring back stuff, and it uses a REST API. So it's a very standard way of interacting with a model. So you send in your request and your authentication authorization headers, and it comes back with the results that you need. So if you can eliminate the step of speaking to an external model by not having to go through an application, bringing the data into your application, and then querying. You can do it directly from the database. So this is the stuff that I care about, the developer features. We've got a new SQL Server Standard Developer Edition. That means if you've been using Developer Edition in the past, and you then try and do a deployment into Standard Edition, and then suddenly a whole bunch of features stop working, well, now Microsoft has come up with this new release where you can design against Standard Developer Edition. If this is something that you were worried about before, and this was a thing that got in your way, well, now you can rejoice. And I don't know how Chris feels about this, but I think this is a really big deal, and it might change a lot of people's minds about testing against Standard Edition. Chris, do you have any opinions on this, or should I just continue?
Because I worked with government, we always had Standard Edition or Enterprise. So I never saw any situations like you're referring to.
Well, that's good. You're lucky. With the consulting side of things, people always wanted to save as much money as they could, so they would go with Standard Edition because it's a quarter of the price, and find out that, oh, well, we have to put in all of these extra features and switches and options, especially in indexed views and so forth, that it became a headache. So I think this is a big deal. I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but it does mean that you don't have any surprises. Then the thing that I really like is native JSON support. So JSON kind of had support in SQL Server 2022, and I think in 2019 as well, but it was being stored and persisted as nvarchar max, just like XML was with some additions. Now it is being stored natively in a JSON data type, which can be indexed. You can run functions against it, and those functions include doing updates inside the JSON objects. So that is very cool if you've worked a lot with JSON data. Postgres has had some built-in stuff for a long time, and now SQL Server is catching up to that. I think that's exciting for folks who work a lot with unstructured data. Well, technically JSON is structured. It's just not structured in a table type of layout. So this can be useful for when you're interfacing different systems with each other, and you can do that inside the database engine so that your two data sources are right next to each other. There are some batch mode optimizations for functions. So traditionally, there have been functions that are serialized and only work in row mode. Those have been optimized for batch. My dog has just barked, so I hope you didn't hear that. I've already spoken about change event streaming. Go look it up. I think it's cool. There's some fuzzy string matching going on as well. That's a new feature, as well as regular expressions. Now, what can I say about regular expressions? If you've had experience with them before, you know that they can get you into trouble. That is not going to change with SQL Server 2025. Because we're just following I think we're following a specific standard for regex anyway. So you will get into trouble in SQL Server as well, and you can bring your server to a screeching halt if you run the wrong query. So please be careful with regular expressions. If you don't know what you're doing, test it first. I like to say that Copilot is a very, very expensive way of getting help with regex. And the fact that we had to build a planet killer that boils our oceans and burns our trees just to help you with regex, I think it was worth it, because regex can be very, very scary. So just because it's supported in the engine doesn't mean it's going to be quick. You have to test, test, test. I spoke about this previously, the external REST endpoint invocation for data models, but you don't have to just do it with language models. You can do it with any REST endpoint. You can interface with anything that speaks REST. That is cool. That is cool if you're trying to bring in information without having to take it through the application layer as well. And then for our Chinese brethren, there are some new collations that better support their text string fields, because language is tricky. Language is tricky on a good day. Even in the Western alphabet, we have problems with languages, so these collations are going to be very useful. Analytics improvements. Do we have any questions before I continue about this?
Yeah, there's two questions in the chat there. The first one is around, with the SSRS retirement, will there be a worldwide party for the retirement?
At my house, yes.
Excellent.
That's a good question. I think SSRS was very good for its time, but Power BI demonstrated that there are better ways to do things. There are some features in SSRS that I'm going to miss, but I don't think people are going to miss the headaches that came with it. So yeah. Next question.
A funeral with dancing.
Was there another question?
Yeah. And a question from Brent as well is, can you control the permissions on the Copilot inside SQL Server? Is it for both the metadata reading, or does it also read the user data as well?
You know, Brent, you know the story. There's a good question. There's a great question. There's an excellent question. This is a great one because I don't know the answer. An excellent question would be, I know the answer and I have a slide for it, but I actually don't know the answer. I think that you can control the permissions, but what I would encourage you to do is go and look at the documentation. I know that we recently made some improvements to Copilot in SSMS with the 21.15 release, or 5.15, I think 15 is right. So just go and check that out. I think you will be able to answer your question by going to the documentation.
Cool. Sorry, quick related question. Do you know if the Copilot sends any of your data off-prem?
Well, it's interfacing with a third party, so the answer is
maybe-ish.
It won't send your data, so you won't unless your query includes database results. But as far as I know, it does not send your data; just might send metadata off.
Okay.
But that I know that is covered in the documentation because I remember editing that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. Good questions. I see a question from Bobby. Go ahead. And Bobby, you're on mute if you were speaking.
Oh, sorry.
No
Does
worries.
this hold true for Enterprise Copilot as well?
I can't speak to Enterprise Copilot. I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm in a very particular field of the company, so I don't know.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk very briefly about analytics. I say briefly because the changes are incremental changes that'll just improve your existing workflow. If you use Polybase to connect to various sources so that you can bring your data in, you can now do that with ODBC sources using SQL Server on Linux. So that's a quality of life improvement. So Linux continues to close the gap between Windows and Linux every release, and even between CUs. So if you've been thinking about moving to Linux because of the licensing costs with Windows and so forth, it might be worthwhile to think about that for this release. And then in general, there is now native support for Parquet, Delta, and CSV sources, so you don't have to connect them as ODBC sources. So if there are any questions about that, I'm just going to skip analytics and move forward because there's not much to say about this. Okay, moving on. HADR, high availability and disaster recovery improvements. A lot of this is in availability groups. In fact, most of this is in availability groups, but there are some other features to speak about. I don't know how much detail the folks watching have about AGs and managing AGs. What I do know is that if you have an availability group, you also have somebody on site who knows what they're doing. Otherwise, you just use log shipping. That's what I can tell you. Like pragmatically speaking, if you're managing a server as a consultant remotely and you don't have an on-site person with AGs, you shouldn't be using AGs because they can break, and they can break spectacularly. You need to have a dedicated person. But if you do have a dedicated person, failover recovery includes batch and asynchronous page request dispatching. That means that when they talk to each other, they can talk to each other a lot more efficiently. And asynchronous page requests means it can happen. It's not synchronous, obviously. I don't think I need to explain the difference between synchronous and asynchronous here. It's just it's more about performance and efficiency when things go wrong. That can also happen with switching to a resolving state after a failure. You can set that yourself. You can also set a faster commit time so that your secondaries can be synchronized a lot quicker. You can control the flow between endpoints. You can configure synchronized performance in async commit mode. There's a lot of stuff here that is just making AGs fail over a lot quicker. Fast failover support for persistent errors. So if the same error keeps happening when you do a failover, you can include that in your fast failover support. New features include backup to immutable blob storage, which I think is a neat feature, because then you've got your, if you don't know what immutable blob storage is for, it's so that you can guarantee that the backups have not been affected by some sort of malware infection, that they'll always be there, they'll be immutable. You can always go back to a state in the past. Very, very useful. There's a lot of third parties that support that, like, I've just forgotten the name. Mike Fall works for them. Anyway, the immutable blob storage is a good thing if you want to make sure that nothing's happened to your backups. This is a new feature as well, support for full and differential backups and secondary replicas. Previously, I think you could only do it on primaries, and now you can do it throughout. So that's cool. Any questions about AGs? Anybody in the chat who knows anything about availability groups? Nothing? I'm okay to move on. I'm just going to check the chat here. Oh, that's the old ones. Okay. All right, security improvements. I mentioned this right at the top of the conversation. Secure by default. That's my phrasing. That's not Microsoft's phrasing. Encrypted by default using TLS 1.3 and TDS 8. TDS is the protocol that Microsoft created for speaking to SQL Server, and TLS is a security standard mostly used in web browsers, but also security certificates implemented with TLS 1.3 have a more efficient algorithm for making connections, and they're more secure. Because I think somebody's already broken TLS 1.0 and 1.1, and 1.2 is not far behind. So it's a good thing that we're moving to TLS 1.3. One of the new improvements is that you can invalidate the security cache per login. So if there's a particular login that needs to be invalidated, you can do that. The password hashes by default are now using a new algorithm, which is a lot more secure, but it also means it is a little slower. So if you have linked servers, you need to be careful about which hashing algorithm you use, because there might be, if you're doing a lot of, this works not just with SQL Server, but if you change your algorithm for password hashing, and you do a lot of connections to a machine, those connections can be slower as a result of the algorithm changing. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking at SQL Server on Linux, they now allow you to do a password policy, a custom password policy, which has been available in Windows, I think, since 2017, but that's now available in Linux. The big thing is SQL Server enabled by Azure Arc. There's a lot of new features around managed identity support. Managed identity is what you should be looking at if you can. Microsoft, some people say Entra, some people say Entra. I'm supposed to say Entra, so I'm going to call it Entra, but I might say Entra from time to time because that's how it looks like it's spelled. Managed identity support with Microsoft Entra for SQL Server enabled by Azure Arc. You can use MI managed identity in outbound connections to Azure resources. You can use it to back up to URL and to restore from URL, and you can use it for EKMs in Azure Key Vault, and also hardware security modules, HSMs. So, are there any questions about the security enhancements in SQL Server 2025 before I move on? You're muted, Brent.
Thanks. With TLS 1.3, can you downgrade it to or open it up to older versions of TLS?
So, excuse me, in 2022, excuse me, in SQL Server 2022, we added some new features around encryption, which was optional and mandatory. I think those were the two options. What TLS 1.3 and TDS 8 bring you is encrypted strict and or yes. So it's a lot more stricter. So if you want to use a less strict one, you have to drop down to TLS 1.2, because TLS 1.3 doesn't, and vice versa. They don't know about each other. So if you want to use the less secure connection, you have to drop down to TLS 1.2. I think that answers your question. Yeah. And also the device libraries. So if you're connecting with ODBC, 18, I think it is, or OLEDB 18. I can never get them right. The new one is version 19, but if you connect with 18, then you don't have to worry about the new encryption, but you have to make sure that your connection string uses the old 2022 compatible connection strings instead of the new stuff, because the old libraries don't know about the new stuff either. So you have to, that's what the testing is about, especially with linked servers, because that's where a lot of people are going to get caught out. They forget that they connect, instead of using Polybase, they'll be using a linked server from 2005 era that just continued working for 20 years, and now it's broken and they don't know why. And it's usually because of that connection string. It's a very good question.
Usually the job you only run annually, or
that's going to be the problem, Brent. There's going to be people who do stuff seasonally, like once or twice a year, once or twice every 3 months, and they don't they don't think to test that until they deploy, and then suddenly a whole bunch of stuff is broken, and a lot of people are going to be upset. So specifically around security, you need to be very careful when upgrading to 2025 that all of your connections, inbound and outbound, are using the correct TLS version and the correct library version, so that you use the correct connection strings per version. Any other questions about security?
Yeah, I noticed the last 2 months has been security issues with SQL. Is this because of being more secure in 2025? You found things that you hadn't seen before?
Chris, I believe you're drawing attention to the fact that we seem to have a lot more GDRs recently. Is that correct?
Yep.
I cannot comment on that.
Okay.
But as Randolph, the former consultant, good observation. Moving on. Database engine improvements. There's 2 slides here. I could have fitted them on one, but then the writing would have been really, really small. This is the stuff I really, really care about for each new release, because it means it's quicker and more dependable. So the first one there, optimized locking. We're at 12:30 now, so there should be time to do a demo for optimized locking. I think you should see that because it's quite impressive. This is something that was released into Azure SQL before SQL Server, and you'll notice that that's been a trend for the last 10 years. Stuff will be released in Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance, and then it'll make its way into the box product. That's exactly what happened here. Optimized locking, that whole issue that has been a problem with SQL, I wouldn't say a problem, it's a feature of SQL Server that introduces lock escalation as you need more and more stuff. It'll take a few rows, then it'll escalate to the page, and then it'll escalate to the entire table, and that can cause performance issues. It's a feature of having multi-user access to a database. So it's not like it's a bad thing, but it can cause performance issues, and it can cause people to be waiting on somebody else to finish a query. So there's 2 ways to get around that. The one is to kill the other query that's taking all those resources, but that's not really what you want to do. So what optimized locking does is it takes away that whole problem of lock escalation. So I do want to do a demonstration on that. It's a very cool feature. It unlocks, no pun intended, a whole bunch of performance improvements along with accelerated database recovery and other things that make 2025 just faster out of the box. That was the whole premise with 2016, if you remember. It was just quicker. I think that applies today with 2025 as well. If you've used Resource Governor, you can now set your temp DB space using Resource Governor, including percent-based limits. I think that's a great thing as well, so that you don't end up running out of disk space on your temp drive, because that happens. And when SQL Server runs out of temp DB, goodbye SQL Server. It's one of those legacy features that everything happens in temp DB, and then suddenly your temp drive goes away and you're out of luck. Sorry. What's also neat is that you can turn on accelerated database recovery in TempDB now. So if you've got transaction-specific stuff that applies to temp tables, this is going to make that a lot more efficient as well. Accelerated database recovery does have some side effects and some things that you need to know about. What it does is it takes away the version control that used to happen in TempDB and puts it into the user database. So in this particular case, it's still going to be in TempDB, but it needs about 10 to 15% more space in your user database to use accelerated database recovery. But what it offers you is instant rollback. So if you have something that takes 2 hours to run and then you need to roll it back, that rollback happens instantly. And that's what you get. That's the trade-off with ADR, is that instant rollback for 10% more of your database size. So I encourage you to use that if you haven't used it already. It's very useful in availability groups when you have to do a fast failover and it rolls back instantly. Very, very cool feature. Another improvement in the database engine is persisted statistics for readable secondaries. So readable secondaries allow you to run reporting and stuff on your secondary, what do they call them? Nodes. I'm going to call them nodes. That's not the right word for them. But when you have readable secondaries, you can now, the statistics can be persisted to those secondaries as well, so that you don't get statistics drift between your primary and your secondaries. And then column store index improvements. I don't know how many people are using column store, but these are, again, incremental improvements just to make the feature better. So now you can have ordered, non-clustered column store indexes. You can do online index rebuilds. And if you have to do a shrink operation, which you should never automate, then there are improvements here as well, because you've got the delta, and sometimes that can block shrink operations, and that's been improved as well. Any other questions about this slide before I move on?
Yeah, there's some questions on the chat there, Randolph. One comment was around...
Yeah, I can see them here. So Rob says, I use availability groups for read-only replicas, i.e. reduce readers and writers blocking each other. That also provides a hardware backup and limits what SQL injection attack could do. That's a fair statement to make, Rob. That's not a bad design. And then Raiz Khan says, with TempDB space resource governor, can you please advise how granularly we can control it per database or per user? That is a very good question, but I think Raiz, it'll be just per database. So your resource governor will say TempDB cannot get bigger than 80% of the drive available. I don't know if it can be per user.
When do you think you can do the optimized locking session? January or February next year?
I'm going to do an optimized locking session at the end of this slideshow. It'll be very quick, but I think you should see it. It's very cool.
Okay.
More improvements to the database engine. And I didn't make this over 2 slides because I wanted you to spend more time on it, but there's just this many features that are being added. There have been improvements to change tracking, specifically around cleanup performance, because that's traditionally been a complaint. And it's also worth noting, I don't want to lie, so I'm going to say I think this is right, but I think you can do change tracking to Fabric as well now. So like, if Fabric is your thing, and I know nothing about Fabric except how to spell it, William Asaf, who you may know of, who's a co-author on the books that I've worked on, is the content lead for Fabric. I don't know anything about it, so maybe. Worth looking at anyway. One of the biggest bugbears that SQL Server 2016 introduced was if you wanted to turn on in-memory OLTP, you needed to create a specific in-memory optimized file group, and it created a directory structure called XTP, and it created a whole bunch of stuff. And when you deleted all of your in-memory stuff and you no longer wanted it, you were stuck with that file group and containers on your hard drive, and you couldn't do anything with them. They were there forever. So what 2025 is doing is giving you the opportunity to remove those containers and file groups for in-memory OLTP. So this slide is incorrect where it says remove OLTP containers. It should say remove in-memory OLTP containers and file groups. So I apologize for the error on my slide. Then if you use SQL Server on Linux, and maybe you're going to think more about doing it now, is that you can have an in-memory TempDB. I'm going to say that again. You can run TempDB in memory. I'm going to say it a third time. You can enable and run TempDB on a file system called TempFS, which is an in-memory file system. So if you've got a box with 2 terabytes of RAM firstly, you've got more money than I do. But secondly, if you're running standard edition and it only goes up to a certain number of megabytes of RAM for the engine and for the buffer pool, you can use some of that extra memory for your temp DB. And as long as you allocate that correctly and you make sure that it is not overcommitted and all those kind of things, this means your temp DB is going to be really, really quick, especially if you turn on ADR, which was the accelerated database recovery. And if you want to manage it using that resource governor, that's also something to think about. Now, I'm not saying that you should move to Linux, except I'm saying that you should move to Linux. Ubuntu 24.04 is official, and Red Hat 10 is obviously going to be the next version because that's the versions that are currently in support from Red Hat. So expect to see that soon. ZSTD backup compression. I don't know what ZSTD stands for. I don't want to pretend to know what it stands for, but what I've seen from third-party blog posts and our own testing is that it is better or the same as current compression. And that means you should just use it. It's better or the same. So just flip to the new one. It's helpful for, I've got a customer that I still work with from time to time. They've got a 60 gigabyte database, and when they compress it down, it compresses down to 3 gigabytes. It's pretty impressive. Definitely turn this on. You don't stand to lose very much. Then two more things on this slide. Who uses Execute SQL? Who uses dynamic T-SQL in their code, in their environment? Yeah, it's not just one of you. For the rest of you who say you don't use it, you're lying, or you just don't know that you're using it. So one of the problems with Execute SQL, if you're using, for example, an ORM like Entity Framework, you're probably using Execute SQL and you don't realize you're using it. So one of the problems is compilation storms. So you'll have a whole bunch of stuff being thrown at the query optimizer, and it might be the same query, and it's just going to optimize every single one every time. So what the new features allow is plan reuse and also avoiding compilation storms. So it uses a serialized method for doing compilation. So you can now think of SP Execute SQL as a store procedure. So it's done some background improvements in the engine to treat it as if it's a store procedure in terms of plan reuse and stuff like that. Is that Bobby saying that's an amazing feature? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I don't know about that. We had a lot of SQL users, so over the last, I don't know, God knows how many years, it's all over our code. SP Execute SQLs through probably the several hundred SQL developers that came through here. It's all over our code, right? So
yeah. Well, hopefully this is one of those improvements that will just make your stuff a little bit quicker just by upgrading, and that's one of the neat things that this release is offering. Then the last thing on this slide is, how many of you have ever opened up an extended event session and then forgotten to close it? I'm going to put up my hand because I'm one of them. There's a lot of us who have done that, and now you can actually time box an extended event session. So it'll turn off at the end of a specific time frame automatically. It's a very small quality of life change, but it definitely is one less thing to worry about. Any questions or comments about this slide? If not, I will continue.
Oh, sorry. Quick question. Yes. With 2016, it was the just faster. Is there kind of a generic 10, 20%, 50% expectation?
Cannot say. I cannot, even if I did have a marketing phrase for you, I wouldn't say that it was. I wouldn't use it because you need to test. You need to test, Brent, because if you've got a JSON heavy environment, you might suddenly find that you're using half the space that you used to just from that, and therefore you're now getting 50% improvements in backup speeds and so on. So it's hard to put a number to it. I'm not saying that you'll get 50% with JSON you have to test, but you will see benefits here and there. If you turn on accelerated database recovery now, and you've never used it, even though it was introduced in 2019, you may see massive improvements in performance, but that's not 2025's fault. You've just now decided to turn it on. So it's really hard to say. I will also say that with the that big issue with Intel CPUs and virtualization, there were a lot of mitigations put in place for the Spectre attack and stuff like that. So if you're running on older equipment, you might find that older CPUs are faster than newer CPUs. I'm not saying that that's going to be the general case, but you might see that. So it's hard to say. It's really, really hard to say.
Thank you.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about Query Store. Show of hands, who has used Query Store? I'm looking at the number of people here. I see one hand up. That's disappointing. And I'll say it's disappointing because Query Store is actually very useful. Brent, you put your hand up as well. Are you using it? You're muted, sorry.
Query Store is great.
Query Store is great. It is not perfect, but it helps. It helps eliminate a lot of performance problem queries that we didn't know we could identify previously. However, I do want to say this, which is not part of the slide. There was a time, once upon a time, there was a consultant from Calgary called Randolph West who was telling people to turn on Optimize for ad hoc workloads. And after a long discussion with various people, including Eric Darling, I no longer advise people to turn on Optimize for ad hoc workloads. Because if you turn on Optimize for ad hoc workloads, sure, you may be freeing up a tiny bit of memory for single-use queries, but now you don't have information in the query store about those single-use queries. And you might have 10,000 single-use queries that are only running once, but it's because of somebody running SP execute SQL. And so if you do use the query store, don't use Optimize for ad hoc workloads, because then you will miss a whole bunch of information that could be extremely valuable to you. So that's what I want to say about Query Store. I think SQL Server 2017 introduced, it may have been 16, but I think it was 17 that introduced the idea of intelligent query processing, where it uses some advanced heuristics inside the engine, along with the cardinality estimator, that's hard to say, the CE, which was introduced, the new one was introduced in 2014. So all of these things combine to help your queries run a little bit more efficiently. Now, it's not perfect, nothing's perfect, but it does make things a little bit more efficient, a little bit speedier. It helps you identify problematic queries. So in 2025, you can now see cardinality estimate feedback for expressions. Previously, you could see CE feedback for other things. Now you can see it on expressions. You have something called optional parameter plan optimization. In other words, in, I think it was 2017 again, and maybe in 2019, these things blur together. Depending on the type of query that you were running, it might run a nested loop or it might run a hash join. And depending on those, it changed the query shape. So what optional parameter plan optimization does is it uses that functionality to decide based on which parameters you're passing in, which plan to create. So that OPPO, or optional parameter plan optimization, is going to make some queries run really quickly because it knows, well, we're only selecting 500 rows. Let's use the nested loop. Instead of 10 million rows, let's use a hash join. So that's another neat feature that's been added. Then degree of parallelism, that's also hard to say. DOP feedback is now on by default. So previously it was off and you had to turn it on. Now it's on by default. And Query Store for readable secondaries is on by default. That is also a neat feature. So it's going to help queries run faster on your secondaries, Rob. And then I'm just going to cover this last thing and then cover the comment in the chat. Abort query execution. Literally says what it does. it aborts a query's execution. So if you find that there's a query that's running every 5 minutes that is really messing up, I almost said screwing up, and I don't want to say that on a recording. If you've got a query that's messing up your performance during important times of day, you can turn on abort query execution hint, and it'll block that query from running. That's what it says on the tin. It's a big hammer, but it's a useful hammer, especially if you're having a busy time of day or month and you want to stop a particular query from running all the time. Let's see here. Rob says Glenberry posted some very favorable ZSTD backup compression benchmarks versus the MS Express status quo. PostScript, the gzip-based compress decompress functions support blob columns, unlike page row compression. That's a very good observation. Thank you for bringing that up, Rob. So if you use a lot of large objects like nvarchar max and so forth, then you will see better compression from ZSTD as well.
Randolph,
thank you. Yes.
The bulk query execution, is that a set on, set off feature?
It's a query hint. So inside query store, you can add a hint to a particular query, because in the query store, you can see the PID, the ID of the query that's being run. You can set on that one abort query execution. So next time it tries to run, it'll just be killed straight away.
The reason I said set on and set off is if half an hour during the day you didn't want this to run, you could schedule it.
Yeah, something like that for that particular query. Yes, because it is query specific. All right, T-SQL language features. We've got a bunch of AI stuff, as expected. If you know what vectors are, like I said in the beginning, this is very exciting. I don't know what vectors are, so I don't know how excited you should be. But this is apparently exciting for vector people. There's a vector distance and a vector norm and a vector normalize. And these are two different things because I looked them up last night just to make sure that I wasn't duplicating something. These are two different things, I promise you. There's a vector property. I don't know what those are, but I do know what a create external model is and an alter external model and drop external model. Because if you want to use that REST endpoint to speak to an external model, you need to tell SQL how to call it. And that's what that's for. So you set up the external model. It uses the REST API to call that external model, returns the data in a specific data set, data model, and talk about overloading a term. An external model is a language model, and the data model is how it looks. Right, so that's cool. There's that stuff. Then there's AI generate chunks and AI generate embeddings. Again, I don't know what those mean. So you can ask me, but I'll say I don't know. If you're in AI space and this is exciting to you, I'm very happy that you're excited. The regular expression stuff, again, you can get yourself into trouble here, but regular expressions also include indexes. So there may be ways inside SQL Server to do regular expression lookups in a table where before you had to use like, percent, whatever, percent, and those did a full table scan. This can be more efficient, presuming you set it up the right way. So this is a useful feature. People have been asking for regular expressions for a very long time. Now they're here. Please be careful with them. Test, test, test. What I like is regexp split to table. So there is already a split function that can split text into I think it's a comma delimited list, but this will split it to a table. So that is useful. I'm not saying regex is not useful. I'm saying it can get you into trouble. Now the JSON stuff. JSON has a data type. You can do indexes. You can do functions. These are two of the new functions that they've added. Object aggregation and array aggregation. I can show you a demo of that if there's time. I'm not sure if there is time because I still want to show you the optimized locking. But Bob Ward, whose demos I'm using, has those demos available on GitHub. So if you want to go and look them up yourself, you're more than welcome to do that. I didn't create my own demos here. I took them from Bob because now he's a work colleague and I can just say, hey, Bob, I'm using your queries. There are some new T-SQL functions that are in this list and some existing functions that have been improved and some functions that are new probably came over from Azure SQL Database. So if you see them here and they look familiar to you, they probably came over from there already, like current date. So substring has been improved. Date add has been improved. Unistring product, current date, edit distance similarity, Jarrow-Winkler distance, Jarrow-Winkler similarity, base 64 encode and base 64 decode, and string concatenation. This is two pipe symbols stuck together, if you're curious. So all of these things have been improved or added to the product for 2025. Any questions about T-SQL features? Nope.
Sorry, is there much deprecated SQL that won't be supported in 2025? On the flip side.
Brent, that's an excellent question.
Oh,
it's almost as though it's my next slide. But to answer your question, not T-SQL specifically.
Okay.
So discontinued, as in it is not going to be in 2025. Reporting services, because Power BI report server is already there, PBIRS. We're getting rid of data quality services because nobody used it, and we're getting rid of master data services because nobody used it. Gone. They're not deprecated, they're gone, right? Synapse Link as well, because I believe it was only useful for 2019 anyway. So because of the other new stuff connecting Azure with on-prem, and also the fact that Synapse is not that much used, I think that they decided Synapse Link needed to go away. And if you used Purview, some access policies have been replaced with other ways of setting your access privileges. Things that have been deprecated: hot add CPU, lightweight pooling, and fiber mode. We've been saying for years that lightweight pooling and fiber mode should not be used. In fact, I attended SQL Skills training in 2012 that said don't use this. They were added to the product to, I can't say that. It is rumored by somebody who used to work at Microsoft that these were added to pass some database speed tests, and so you shouldn't use them in production. It is rumored. I cannot confirm nor deny, and I didn't say it. Any questions about discontinued and deprecated features? Nope. Good. I think you want to see that demo. We're going to do a whistle-stop tour of SSMS then. I don't know if you know, but SQL Server Management Studio 21 was the first version that runs on 64 bits. What does that mean? It means, practically speaking, larger script files. What does that mean? It means that when you open a big script, it's not going to crash SSMS, which was one of my major bugbears. It uses the Visual Studio installer, so you don't have to download a 3 GB file every month. Okay, I'm going to say that again. You don't have to download a 3 GB file every month. All you do is you open up SQL Server Management Studio. It'll say there's an update. You run the updater, and it updates your tool. And it takes very little time. It includes, SSMS 21 includes Copilot in SSMS, which is to say that SSMS 22 Preview 1, which was released a week ago, does not include Copilot in SSMS. That's okay, because you can run them side by side. It includes the migration component as an optional extra, just like Copilot is optional. It includes dark mode, for those of you who care about dark mode. I don't happen to be one of those people, but if you like dark mode, it is now in the product. And it includes a modern connection dialog screen, which means to say all of that stuff about encryption that Brent and I spoke about earlier in the session is easier to see on the screen. You can copy and paste connection strings too, which is very cool. Think of SSMS 21 as the security release. Think of SSMS 22 as the SQL 25 release. So SQL Server 2025 is not fully supported in SSMS 21, but SSMS 22, when it is released, will be the one that includes all the features of 21, plus it will fully support 2025. Now, we started a little after the hour, so you've got about 5 minutes. You get to choose one of these things for me to demonstrate to you, and hopefully that my screen sharing works. I would encourage you to choose optimized locking because I think it's a cool feature. But if you want to see something else on this list, you're more than welcome to say it.
Let's go for the one you think is cool.
Optimized locking. I'm so glad you chose that one, Brent. It's like I didn't guide you at all. All right.
I'm easily influenced.
Okay. Hopefully you can just see, and that seems to be big enough, so that's good to see. Okay. Now, if you'll bear with me, I need to open up the instructions on a different screen because I am nothing if not lazy. And as I mentioned to you before, these are Bob Ward slides. So optimized locking, let's have a look at it. This is a demo for the optimized locking feature in SQL Server 2025. If you can tell that I'm reading, no, I'm not, you're lying. This feature is designed to improve the performance of concurrent transactions by reducing contention on locks. We are going to use the AdventureWorks database that you can see over here. The AdventureWorks database, I hate that screen, has tables and views that you may be familiar with, human resources, production, sales, and all that kind of stuff. The AdventureWorks database has been around for a while, but you should be familiar with it. And just to prove that I am what I say I am, that I'm using SQL Server on Linux from a Windows machine. Did you see it there? There it is, Ubuntu. I'm literally using a Linux machine because that's who I am. So that is to say all of these features work on Linux. So we've restored the AdventureWorks database, and now what we're going to do is enable accelerated database recovery for AdventureWorks. That was really quick because I had already done it earlier today. Then we're going to make sure that optimized locking is disabled because optimized locking is what we're about to demonstrate to you. So I'm going to make sure that that's off. So we're starting with a point where accelerated database recovery is turned on. That is a prerequisite for this feature. Okay. Lock escalation. In this demonstration, you will see how optimized locking can avoid scenarios that typically require lock escalation and can affect the concurrency and availability of applications. In this scenario, the application needs to update a large number of rows with an update statement on the table called sales order header. The developer of the application has been seeing blocking problems with this update, and administrators have seen excessive lock memory required. So we're going to run a little script here called getLocks, and we're going to use this to observe behavior. When I run this here, it's going to return nothing because nothing's currently running. But as soon as we start running a small query, you'll see how things can go wrong very, very quickly. So here is a script called update freight small, and it's small because we're only updating 2,500 rows. All right. So we're going to run this in a transaction, and then we're going to roll back the transaction so that none of the changes stick. But what we're looking for is running inside a transaction an update statement that updates 2,500 rows. All right, so 2,501 rows are currently being updated in the transaction. So when we go over to the locks page, we're going to see 2,501 locks. With me so far, there are also 111 page locks. So we're looking at 2,612 locks just to do a small update in 2,500 rows. So far, so good. Now we're going to roll this back because I want to show you how bad it can really get. So there's nothing currently running here. Now we're going to do update big. Big has got 10,000 rows, and I want to show you how bad it can get. So let's run that again and run the get locks. And we can see here, it is escalated 10,000 because I think the threshold is 5,000. It is escalated to an exclusive table lock, which is bad. Because if I now want to run another script at the same time to update rows, I cannot because I have to wait for this 10,000 row script update to go away before mine can continue because it is escalated up to an exclusive lock. With me so far.
Yep.
If we update max down here, and try and run this, it's blocking. Okay, let's have a look here. There's a wait on the same object that has got an exclusive lock. So far, so good, right? So let's roll back this tran. That's the wrong one. Let's roll back this tran. And then let's roll back this one. So we understand what the problem is. That's good. Now we're going to do optimized locking turned on. So let's enable optimized locking, which is a new feature in SQL Server 2025. It takes a little while because there's some stuff that it had to roll back because we told it to roll back immediate, but now it is turned on. So you don't want to run this in the middle of the day, kids. You want to run this when nobody's working on your system because you may make some people unhappy. So all we've done now is we've turned on optimized locking. I'm going to close all of these things out so that we don't get confused, and that the only thing that's running now is get locks, and there's nothing running right now. So far, so good. So now that we've turned on optimized locking, we're going to open the update freight small script, the same one as earlier. We're going to run that. So remember, there were 2,501 plus 111. If we run the script again, there's only one lock for each of these things. So already you can see that that whole lock escalation problem is immediately going away. Because what optimized locking does is it looks for which rows you're updating, and it checks to see what other script needs access, and it'll figure out which rows you need to lock. So far with me, you see an object IX lock as you saw before, but only a transact execution exclusive lock. So the exclusive lock is on the transaction, not on the object. Okay. Now if we run update freight big at the same time, what happens here? Well, it's still going to wait on this object, but it's a shared lock. There's no exclusive lock. So if we roll that back, bing, bang, bong, there's your 10,000 that ran just fine. So, boo, 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 boo. Boo, boo, boo. So there was no 10,000 locks. That's the important thing here. Let's now run the two big ones together and see what happens. Bing, bang, bong. So, whoops. Thank you, Microsoft, for telling me that I haven't finished that. Let's close it out. So the final demo, we're going to do update freight max and then update big. So let's big first. So this is the 10,000 that we saw before. Just going to confirm there's your 10,000, but it's only showing one. The request mode is exclusive lock just on the transaction, and it's just an intent exclusive on the object itself. And then if we open the max one, it runs because it's not being blocked. Let's have a look here. Intent exclusive on the object, and the exclusive lock was only on the transaction because they were updating different parts of the table. So they did not block each other. And Brent, the face you made is exactly the face I made when I saw this demo for the first time. It's like, oh, that's actually cool.
Very cool. How does it work under the covers?
It's only looking at the rows that you're changing, and it doesn't need to escalate. It doesn't need to escalate
skipping the page and extemp locks and all that.
Correct.
And then it's using ADR to keep a shadow copy, sort of?
Something like that. Something like that. But now I'm going to show you, I know we're way past time now, but I want to show you something called lock after qualification. Okay, now this is a little bit more to get your head around, right? So bear with me, but this is cool. Lock after qualification, LAQ, is an optimization that evaluates query predicates using the latest committed version of the row without acquiring a lock. So that's what you were talking about. So this is where RCSI comes into play, because read committed snapshot isolation is going to come in with versioning and stuff like that. Okay, so recommitted snapshot isolation is going to be your friend here. You need RCSI turned on for lock after qualification to work, but it's going to be what you just said. So LAQ is the feature you were referring to, because it wasn't using recommitted snapshot isolation before. It was just using a different optimization for lock escalation. So let's show you the demo of what you just spoke about, using versioning to stop blocking. So far with me, let's look at the scenario for the AdventureWorks database where LAQ can improve the concurrency of the application. In this scenario, the application needs to execute an update for specific purchase order numbers in the sales order header table. Developers have seen blocking problems with this update. The column does not have an index, so it has to do a clustered index scan. That's bad. That's bad. That's a whole table scan, right? This table is not large, so the scan can be fast, and so an index was not created. So they thought they were saving time by not creating an index because the table isn't big, but things are being blocked. So let's see what the blocking problem looks like without LAQ. LAQ stands for lock after qualification. Remember that we have the get locks here that tells you what's running at the moment. Currently it's nothing, so I'm going to close that out and then close that out just to make sure that we're looking at the right stuff. And we're going to have a script here called show blocking. Now show blocking is going to tell us the exact script that's blocking, just to show you that we're not cheating here. We're going to update the purchase order numbers in one section of the table with the script called update freight PO1. And all we're doing is we're updating one row, well, maybe more than one row, but basically one row where the purchase order number is a certain value. And then we're going to do the same thing at the same time for a different purchase order number. With me so far. So let's run this one here. And there it's running in the transaction, and then we run this one at the same time. What just happened there? My script failed. Why did it fail? Did I turn off optimized blocking? My script is so good. Oh, I didn't turn off RCSI. That's fine. Folks, if you've never had a demo failure, you're not demoing properly. That's funny. So, to tell you what happened here, AdventureWorks automatically has recommitted snapshot isolation on. And so I had to turn it off before I ran the query to show you how awesome this feature was. So, shall we try that again? So I'm just going to make sure that there's nothing there. There shouldn't be anything there because that thing rolled it back. Okay, so without RCSI enabled, this should be blocking. Okay, that's exactly what we see now. So I'm just going to show you the show blocking queries. There, in fact, we're blocking on a resource. Okay, it's saying update a specific purchase order number, and that is exactly what we'd expect to see. We're waiting on the same resource. Okay, and then as you saw, when I turned on RCSI, then it worked fine. So that's an embarrassing demo failure, but at least you saw the net benefits of that. So I'm going to show you again. They're not blocking each other. Bang. There it's running. And sure enough, it's going to update the same thing. So apologies for the demo failure, but I think you got the idea. Optimized locking improvements make concurrency a lot easier, especially in objects that may not have indexes or that have a lot of rows, so that the lock escalation makes it all the way up to table level and does an exclusive lock on the table. So apart from my little demo failure, do you have any questions about that? Do you think this is a cool feature? Is this something that you can see yourselves using in the near future?
Absolutely. Could be really awesome. So in terms of upgrade, when you take, it's a database feature. So if I take a database that's currently in 2016, migrate it up to 2025, it'll retain the old non-ADR. Yeah, and then I'll have to actually enable it.
And as I said before, ADR is a very, very cool feature, and with recommitted snapshot isolation and all these TempDB improvements, they're all very cool, but you need to test everything and make sure that nothing conflicts, because we've had stories with temporal tables and accelerated database recovery not necessarily breaking each other, but having some issues where the type of temporal query was causing ADR to store a lot more data than they were expecting. And that's something that you have to test, because your system could be different. Well, it is different to mine, and I may never see that kind of problem. So you have to test everything.
Time travel is hard.
Time travel is hard even on a good day. So if you're doing temporal tables and you're doing ADR and you're doing this kind of stuff, you might find some weird stuff in your history table. I don't know. You'll have to see for yourself. I like temporal tables. I think it's one of the best features that 2016 introduced. So, all right, I'm way over the time that I allotted for myself, and I know folks want to get back to, they desperately want to get back to work.
I'd like to say thank you. Doing this, Randolph, considering I only contacted you like 10 days ago, you put together a wonderful experience for us all.
Including a demo fail, which was nice, because I haven't had one of those in a while. And the hubris keeps me, I'm not that good. It's a good reminder. Awesome. I'm glad that you were all able to attend, and I hope that you got something from this. I would say that as with any environment, and I've been harping on about testing, it's a new product. There's a lot of cool new features. The security is going to be the thing. So if you're going to be deploying 2025, you need to make sure that all of the components that connect to your SQL database and anything that it may connect to, make sure that you've got that security settled, tested correctly, because it could bite you if you don't. Don't just assume it'll just work, because it may not, especially if you upgrade your ODBC and OLADB libraries to version 19. I see some comments in the chat here. Rob says the 2025 discontinued MDS database includes regex, string similarity, and many other functions. I do a ton of Windows command line processing, including. So I think, Rob, what we've come to is MDS as a separate feature is no longer necessary as well. So there's a lot of stuff that may have found its way into the current database engine to resolve that. Thank you, everyone else. Appreciate it. Get back to work.
So what version of Windows Server will 2025 run on?
The same as 2022 and 2019, as long as they're in support. So Microsoft is pretty good with that. Windows has, just like SQL Server, Windows has a 5-year mainstream support and a 10-year extended support. That's also why you should be getting off Windows 10, by the way, and onto Windows 11. I may not agree with the fact that Windows 10 needs to go away. I think it may be one of their better operating systems, and I may not necessarily think that 11 is there yet, but that's my opinion and not Microsoft's opinion, and it's out of support anyway. So move to 11. You're going to have to. Yeah, or use Linux. Use Linux for SQL.
All right, Randolph, thank you so much for your time again today. Great presentation and demo. For the group, the next sessions will be on October 20th. We'll announce the presentation topic and so forth in the following few days or weeks or so. Again, thanks, Randolph, and thanks everyone for coming. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.